Welcome everybody to the Meeple Syrup Show, where designers are discussing designs. I'm Dylan Kirk. I'm here with my brother Daryl and with Sen-Foong Lim, and tonight we're going to be talking about Wargames. Let me tell you, I am about as excited as a Labrador Retriever at Wimbledon. This is going to be a fun one. We're here tonight with Brett Myers and Jeph Stahl, who are, among other things, co-designers of the Lord of the Rings dice building game. But we're going to start out just by introducing our hosts. Here's Daryl Andrews. How you doing, Daryl?
I am doing well. I am excited about the show. I can't wait for talking about Wargames. We have a couple of great guests.
Absolutely. And Sen, our man on tech tonight.
Hi, how you doing? I'm really happy to be here. I like Wargames. I was actually like cut my teeth on Wargames, and so it's really nice to see Jeph and Brett here when we introduce them later. But first, we're going to talk about what we've been up to lately, I think. So, Daryl, what have you been playing lately? Tell us.
Yeah, well, this week I have played. I'm trying to think, what did I play? Oh, on the weekend I was at a Tri-City Tabletop event. We do fundraiser events, and so I got to play a few games. One was Sheriff of Nottingham, tons of fun. I think I've even mentioned that on the show. I picked that up at Gen Con. The other thing I picked up was Panamax. So I finally got to play Panamax. The game was phenomenal, except I don't know if maybe I'm just a superior player. I would like to think that, but well, I'm not a big fan of the end scoring cards, because all of a sudden, like, the game was really close, and then we're like, all right, score end cards, and then I just creamed everyone. So I don't know. We might have played something slightly wrong, or it just went really well for me.
Dylan, what have you been playing, buddy?
I haven't been playing myself, but I walked in on my son playing Settlers of Catan with one of his best friends.
I seriously thought you were going to say something else. Seriously.
I was like, PG.
Oh, PG.
But you know what? It's almost exactly the same thing. Because, you know, amongst gamers, you totally lose your hipster cred as soon as you start playing something like Settlers of Catan. It's like, yep, that's a little bit 15 years ago. You know, it's not quite hipster enough. So the thing is, with watery, shining eyes, he looks up to me and he says, "Daddy, can you please buy me Catan?" And you know, like who can resist that? So I went and I bought him Catan.
Oh, you're a good dad.
Or just down the road. He was so thankful. But yeah, Catan has been where it's at this week. We'll see where we are next week.
Excellent. So for me, we won't judge. I got a mystery package from Z-Man. I'll be at CastleCon in October 19th, CastleCon up in Whitby, as their special guest, teaching this game, Akrotiri, as one of the things that's happening there, but also teaching other games. So for the War Game segment, I'm going to be teaching Pocket Battles, which is kind of an interesting take on war games. I'm also going to be teaching a whole bunch of other games, but we don't need to talk about them because they're not really war games. I just thought I'd show that particular one in my game, of course. Oh, and I'll also be running there's more. This town ain't big enough for the 2 to 4 of us competition at CastleCon as well. So you can win a copy or 2. I have like multiple copies. So yeah, come check us out.
But you're already starting a discussion on what's a war game and what isn't exactly a war game. Is there some like varied flavor of war games? I think we need to bring in our experts to talk about this.
Yeah, why don't you tell us who we got, and Sen, why don't you invite them in?
Here they come.
I trust you, Sen.
Oh no, they're coming. So you need to, boys, you need to unmute your mics. Oh, there's Brett.
Yay!
And where's Jeph?
So here we are. Brett Myers has just come on, and oddly enough, in a link to our last week's show, they actually co-designed the Lord of the Rings dice building game along with Eric Lang. So there's all sorts of wonderful connections here.
Well, it's like 7 degrees of Kevin Bacon.
This is a trifecta. I mean, like it's like we're done. We'll just hang up our mics from now and you know we're complete. Everything's done here.
There's Jeph.
There we are, and there's Jeph Stahl. So Jeph Stahl, among other things, I was kind of I had seen Dawson City Barbers when it first came out. I thought that was absolutely hilarious. But 1775, 1812, all sorts of fun stuff that you've worked on. Great to have you both here. And why don't you join in and tell us what you've been playing before we get into the real meat of the matter. Jeph, why don't we start with you? What have you been playing just recently?
Well, it's going to be a pretty short one because I've been on the road for about a month, so I haven't really played too much, but I did pick up a couple games recently. I want to try this one, Shindig Machine. It's like an indie game about a storytelling type of game, all kind of crazy artwork, black and white artwork. So I haven't played it, but it looks really cool, and so.
I've never even heard of that. That looks good.
Shindig Machine.
And Brett, what about you?
You want to talk about hipster cred? There it is, right there.
That's pretty hipster. So, I've been playing a lot. I run a game group that meets at one of our local taverns every other week or so. And so I tend to play a lot of games that are playable in a pub situation with people who may not be as heavy gamers as you and I are. So a lot of lighter games. Splendor has been getting a lot of play. I just broke out Dungeon Raiders. I got a copy of that. It's a little tease. I should look that up before I talk about it. But it's a little indie kind of card game about dungeon crawling, and you play some cool little power cards, and you go through a dungeon level by level. You're trying to leave the dungeon with the most money, and that one's really cute. I like that one a lot.
Excellent, excellent. Well, thanks guys for sharing what games you're playing. But I'm going to just dive right into our topic because I'm sure our viewers are curious. I'm going to start with Jeph. What defines a war game? We have this topic, and you are the Golden Geek Award winner. What is a war game?
Well, I think you'll get an answer depending on who you ask. There's the war gamers themselves. They have their own sort of definition of what a war game is, and the Euro gamers have an idea. But my idea of what a war game is obviously it's got to be a battle, a conflict of some sort, and you in a lot of these sort of historic side of things, you want it sort of based on some sort of historic item. Not necessarily all war games, but you can see sort of futuristic combats and stuff like that. But I would say even like the Eurotrash, not the Eurotrash, the Ameritrash games are war games too. And but I don't know, some war gamers say they have to have little chits, and it's got to be long and a lot of rules. But I call that more of a simulation when it comes down to what the subcategory of war game.
Okay, so Brett, I know that you're not, the uber war game kind of guy that maybe
Right.
Jeph is. So what is there in it for regular everyday gamers to play war games? Why do we even play these games?
I think for me, I like a lot of theme in my games, and one thing that war games really do well is theme, in my opinion. That it's one thing to say a game is about trading in the Mediterranean, and it's another to say this is a game about this specific situation in the Mediterranean where there was these particular guys and they fought these particular other guys, and you can really delve into the historicity or the historical background of a situation, more so than you can in a game that's ostensibly about shipping cloth or something like that. It gives you a deeper touch with the history. I like history a lot.
Excellent.
That's actually kind of a great segue because we've got Jeph here with 1775 and 1812, the invasion of Canada. How much does the history play into the game itself? And how much inspiration do you draw from the history? How much has got to be focused on actually just simulating conflict itself?
Good question. I guess it depends on what game you're talking about. But in this sense, for 1812, which started it all, it was all about the history initially. I worked a lot in that sort of era in the the Horseshoe region there. I saw a lot of battles of the War of 1812. So Bo Beck and myself, we worked at a historic mill and things like this. So we lived that for our young life, and we always wanted to make a game based on it. So we developed that game, and a lot of the historic parts of what we learned, both the militia running away and things like that, it affected the gameplay and what actually happened. And it's interesting with war games because it's history is written by the winner. So you see these units. Oh, these units have to be better. These have to be worse. But really, why? Well, because the winner says of the battle said historically they were worse. So then your units are now worse. So it comes down to sometimes you break it into a simulation historically.
So Daryl, then I understand that you know a little bit about. There's a question from a viewer.
Yeah, absolutely. So a question came in from at the Toms or David Toom, and he asked the question, which I think is a great one, and I'm going to send this to Brett. How or do you distinguish between war games and civ games?
And what games?
War games and civilization games.
Yeah, I do.
And what would that line be for you? Like what?
Well, I suppose any civilization game would naturally need to include some sort of a warlike element because, like it or not, that's been a part of civilization since the beginning. But there's a lot of things that are in civilizations games that you wouldn't necessarily expect to see in a war game. I think a lot of war games model economics, economics of a wartime industry and things like that. But it's an odd question. We're odd enough that I hadn't really considered that you would think need to distinguish between the two, I suppose.
Yeah, no, that's fair. That's fair. I thought it was a pretty interesting question. I think you answered it though. Civ games incorporate war, but they incorporate usually, maybe some different mechanics as well. And maybe along those same lines, but I'm going to throw the question to Jeph. Another viewer's question. We got a tweet from Scott Elms, who was a previous guest of the show. So thanks for sending us a question and putting new guests under the grill, per se. But Jeph, here's a question. What's a good war game to convert Euro gamers? So, we're talking about different styles of games.
Yeah.
What would you suggest as a good gateway war game?
I think Combat Commander. It's one of my favorites. That sort of it gives you a lot of that Euro mechanics, but a lot of the war game mechanics as well. It's all driven by cards. All the die results are on cards, and it really gives that element of storytelling that you'll see in a game like that. So yeah, Combat Commander Europe or something like that would be a nice, even because you can just play the first level of it and it's very quick.
Mm-hmm.
So with the example of Combat Commander, and I'll kind of send this right back to you. To what degree do you think that historical accuracy is going to play into that, and how much do we all know that there are the true war gamers who will nitpick to death any kind of design that strays from historical reality. How much would that play into that particular example?
Yeah, I haven't played all the Combat Commanders, but in Europe, they have specific little battles and skirmishes that you play, and they, for me, not knowing exact history, you could read about it. They have a little blurbs about it, but you could just sort of play it, and it looks like just a road crossing, and you say, I have to take over that little hut, and you have to stop me, or I have to run my men through that road before so many turns. So you don't necessarily need a lot of historical stuff. It's there if you want to go deeper, and you understand a little bit more about the units and the types. But for the casual Euro gamer who wants to try it, you can play it without needing that deep understanding of the history.
Brett, I wanted to go back to you in terms of what you said earlier in regards to theme. and what Jeff's bringing up right now in terms of historical accuracy. You were, I believe, a playtester on 1775 and 1812 and all those games, right?
Yes, that's correct.
And how did they come out to you in terms of that engagement and that thematic link back to history? How did that make you feel?
I thought they were. I like the games a lot. I think they're both very. They without getting like very specific on certain details of, you know, this unit can march exactly this far and this unit can march exactly that far. You get more of a feel of how to use the land and to work. You know, both games use the First Nations or Native Americans in the system, and I think they're both. In both games, are a very important part of the system, and I think it kind of gives you a closer idea on the kind of the politics of the game of the period, and making alliances with different, you know, with the different tribes and groups in the period. So you don't get like the specific detail you would find in a conflict simulate, like a con-sim game. But it gives you like a really neat idea of how it might have felt to be maybe a wider commander in that period where you do have to kind of make deals with the indigenous peoples and try and, you know, work with them to your advantage.
I want to grab right onto that feeling of being there and kind of the experience of the game, and follow up with you, Brett. Just what kind of a feeling are you looking at from a game of the time? I mean, just to throw in my 2 cents. I mean, obviously the First Nations were a decisive factor in the early opening moves of the War of 1812s, and simply the threat that there were First Nations along with British forces forced the Americans to stay within their bases for quite a long time at the start of the war. So, what kind of, like, when you're talking about that experience of making alliances with what was probably the most potent weapon of the Canadian forces early on, what kind of a feeling are you looking for?
Well, to be honest, that's not my strongest period. I don't know, you know, I don't know the history of that era as well as I probably should. You know, being the American here, we kind of glossed over 1812 a little bit in history class. I know it's kind of a big deal for you guys north of the border, but I heard something about the White House getting burned down. I don't know.
Well, you brought up the subject, and I had made a joke on Twitter, read about stealing you and bringing you up to Canada, because Jeph is a Canadian who has recently moved to the States, if I'm correct about that.
We can have a little culture swap.
Yeah, but I don't approve that trade. But I was curious, Jeph, how does kind of your Canadian roots play into 1775 and 1812? Was there any? I know you're from the kind of the St. Catharines, Grimsby area, and there's a lot of significance in that area.
Yeah, I still live in Grimsby, but I just have a place here in Chicago right now for work. So I'm back and forth commuting 8 hours. So yeah, I mean the whole area you know that in that Niagara region and the North Shore of Lake Erie, that's where I grew up in Port Dover, Ontario, and it's a lot of history. If you just look around for it, there's like 200-year-old mills. There's battlefields, and if you even look up, dug up in the ground, you find arrowheads and things like this. So all that impacted the game design. And you can notice that on the games, we have a third one coming out, but they all have where we live on the map. Like you can see, we're not making a game about Europe right yet. We're doing what we like, and that's our local history. And a lot of, even the French Indian War and stuff like this is like, wow, this happened right here in our area, and then this happened, and these people were fighting these people, and it's just like really amazing, all this history that happened right under our feet. And we're not as old as Europe, but we still had like 4 major wars in the past 200 years.
That's an extremely interesting response, especially given kind of we've got both sides of the border here on a war that involved both of us, and we all know who the winners were, right?
Yes.
Yeah. We're just gonna keep on rubbing it. Anyway. But
all our American viewers, I'd just like to point this out.
But the thing is, I mean, okay, we'll give you the Battle of New Orleans, right? But the issue, of course, is then, like, to what degree does that geography play in? I mean, we're talking about something that has great historical roots to everyone kind of here in this region, and yet, you know, people are playing games about thousands of years ago. They're playing in my particular study. I have a master's in military strategy in Japanese naval history. So like that's where I put my interest. But the like, how much does the geography play into the amount of interest you have in these games? So, Brett, what do you think about that?
What do you mean the geography?
Yeah, how much does the geography, is the geography important to you? Is that something that brings you into the game, or is it something else within the game itself?
I guess explain that to me one more time. Like the geography, like the actual physical geography of the land, or like where I live.
Does the fact that you're actually connected to the region, or at least to one of the combatants, you know, play into that?
Gotcha. You know, not especially for me. I'm not a big student of warfare. I don't, you know, I'm learning a lot right now, but I don't have the background in military history that sounds like you do. So I don't have that kind of historical military background to really, you know, I haven't visited the national battlefields, you know. I guess maybe it's part of my poor upbringing in so far as like learning our American history, but I don't really feel a connection to that.
Well, let's spin this back into a game design sense. I mean, for me, it's like if you have a unit, it could be a little cube unit, and it's in a battle and it wins a battle. Suddenly, that unit's got experience, and you have a connection with that unit more so than other units that haven't had a battle. It still doesn't have any more credentials or doesn't have any new stats. But suddenly, now put that same unit in a place you know, and it's like, oh, it's in New York State. Look, it's attacking New York, and suddenly players of the games with this that know of that now have an emotional connection to that. And it sometimes overrides their strategic sense and say, okay, I'm going to throw this large force at New York, even though it doesn't make sense. And I think that the games 1812 and 1775 have that in there. You can really win the game, not just on strategy, but on breaking the opponent's strategy, rather, type of things. And you can, deal a lot. I always attack Americans in Detroit first, because I know they get angry about that. Like, I'm gonna keep that area, even if I don't want it. Just attack it, hold it. They'll come attack it. I mean, it is part of the game, and it's more of a psychological sense. These units and the territory.
Absolutely. No, I
might not be the same.
No, I love that. Obviously, we're stirring up some passionate responses from our viewers that have people who have deep connections to certain games as well. So I got a couple more interactions online. One from Ed Bryan asking, is Memoir 44 considered a war game? And also, kind of along the same lines, I have from Gavin Brown, can A Few Acres of Snow be considered a war game? So either of you familiar with one or both of those games? And what would you say? Would those be considered war games?
Sure.
Yeah.
If I have any definition, that should be a war game. You're definitely battling, and it's not a classic war game style, but it's definitely a war game. Both of them. Memoir 44 And I would say even on the lesser side, a few acres of snow.
Well, and a few acres models the economics of war.
What do you mean? Maybe explain that for our viewers that may not be as familiar.
Well, like if you remember, like say playing Axis and Allies back in the 80s or 90s, you know, Axis and Allies has a big economy built into it where you can have plants and factories and stuff back at home, and you're making money and you're spending the money to buy more ships, and you gotta ship them out and stuff. A few acres of snow kind of models a little bit of that economy, right? Where you can, you know, because of the nature of the deck building and that, when you buy a unit, you add it to your deck, and it, you know, that kind of simulates the time it takes for that unit to be trained up and finally arrive at its destination to do whatever it is you're doing with it. So it kind of models the economics of war in a sense. So does that make sense?
Jumping off that from economy, actually, I mean, lots of us, I remember back in school, we always said, we don't do tanks and guns history. This is not tanks and guns study. And, you know, hearkening back to my days as a youth, going through books on tanks and memorizing the armor thicknesses of all of the various forms of Panzer III, it was kind of a bit of an about face. But, Jeph, like, going back to, you know, you just said, yes, of course, you know, a few acres of snow, it's a war game, but where do you draw your line? Like, how much of a war game can be economy before it's now just a Euro or what have you?
Well, it's a big gray line, right? I mean, it's going to be if there's no battles or no war, then it's not a war game. There's got to be at least a battle. There's got to be conflict. There's got to be a war of some sort to be a war game. Qualified as a war game. Now, going the other way, it's even harder. It's how much is a war game as you more go Euro and just trade cards and stuff. How does that not become a war game? And it's a I don't know if there is a fine line that you can say it is or it isn't. It's just what you want to play.
I would say like any game about war is a war game. In my opinion, it's really just the degree to which it's abstracted or simulated. That's kind of my thoughts on it. You know, if the game is about a war or about conflict, it's a war game. You have a scale where on this end of the scale is like, you know, terrible swift sword or, you know, some sort of super detailed conflict simulation game, and on the other end of the scale is chess or Go, where the war is fully abstracted to just, you know, basic, you know, representational blocks, right? You know, and so any game, you know, chess and the other games, you know, those conflict simulations are all war games. They're just on different points on that scale of abstract to simulation.
Absolutely. No, I love it. And I know Dylan's losing it with Go. He thinks Go is thematic, and we have had this debate before. So he's going crazy. But
well, I agree that Go is thematic.
No, I agree. I just am so happy right now. Just let me
say, okay, so that's the thing, though. So my scale goes from abstract to simulate.
Yes.
Abstract to theme. Theme is another scale somewhere else.
Absolutely. I love it. And maybe let's continue down this path, because Jeph, you both use the word conflict, and I think that's a real key term that we should talk a little bit more about. What ways do games interact with conflict? As game designers that are watching, what are some interesting ways that you have found that people are designing or interacting with conflict?
Okay, so you're asking what kind of design mechanism will simulate conflict or will have that?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's lots of them. You know, the basic ones in war games is the dice rolling type of thing and adding modifiers to it. Card play, and usually some of the new card-driven games have limited cards in your hand where you can play, but you sort of got to manage that hand first before you can attack. Unit size, things like that, the quantity versus quantity. Those are new methods. I always liked little ones where, I don't know if it was a war game, but it was with the cosmic ashtray. You put all the units in there and you draw one out. It's sort of like the Wallenstein Tower. That's another good battle. It could be a battle thing. It's a Wallenstein type of tower.
Yeah.
Anything that sort of randomizes it based on those variables of number of units or the strength of the units, things like that would be a good simulation of conflict for gamers, I would think.
On that note, I wanted to talk about asymmetry in units. When we design, as designers, when we make different units in games, and especially in particularly conflict-related games, we have to think about which unit is stronger and which unit is weaker, and what's the granularity and what level of abstraction we're taking this to. So it kind of goes back to Brett's question about, detailed sim to kind of an abstract abstraction of war. Brett, can you tell me how maybe you saw in Jeff's multiple iterations of 1775 and 1812 how the unit asymmetry played out as a playtester?
That was pretty. Jeez. I think that was fairly well baked in from the beginning. That they came up with that the different dice system early on, where each different type of unit, whether it was the militia or the regulars and the natives, they all have a different type of dice that they use and a different amount of dice that they can use, and so those dice carry from game to game, so that I haven't seen really a lot of change in the how the units have worked over the years. They've always worked pretty similar to that, to where they started off with. It was kind of a matter of maybe tweaking the numbers of faces on the dice themselves for different results. But yeah, in general, as far as I remember, the different units haven't changed a lot over playtesting. It was, mostly you would the action cards that you get to play that kind of can bring in some of the actual historical events, the event cards that you can play that bring in a little bit more historical kind of background to the game and give you more of a connection to the actual events of the past. Those have been interesting, and those allow you to kind of take what might be like this little handful of a few cubes here and say, well, this is actually so and so's raiders and they're doing this cool thing over the river.
It's nice to kind of ping off that idea to asymmetry and bring it back to Jeph, simply because you're looking at conflicts like 1812 and 1775. I mean, many conflicts. You look at the history, you see that in a lot of cases the results were kind of a foregone conclusion. Where the conflict is unbalanced and it's gonna end in a certain way no matter what. It's almost like the only thing you can do is control how less bad your result is as the loser. So how do you use that kind of asymmetric history in a game? How can you set your victory conditions, things like that?
It's a good question. It's something I'm working on right now. And also on a game that I sort of gave up on for a time, which is the U.S.-Mexican War, because it was just so one-sided that it was, pretty much impossible for Mexico to win. So I was trying to think of, okay, so how can I make it a game that Mexico could win, or how can I incorporate not just a two-sided battle by incorporating the Native Americans and things like this, and just like. It's very hard, and that's why I think we started on games that had a close outcome. And I think both of the wars, 1812 and 1775, could have ended either way, very to the end. So it was a little bit easier that way, so everybody felt they had a chance at winning. I'm not a fan of games that say just hold on till the end. I'd rather I like where there's a definite end. So I'm still struggling with that in some games, but you sort of have to sometimes break a little bit with history and allow things to change. You're going to lose some historic fans that way, but you still want people to play it and they can enjoy it. There is little few tricks that you can do. Special units, just having your one general that you love so much from history, being able to play him and do different things. That's one thing to do. Just put elements like that in there.
So it's a kind of a germane quote from Clausewitz that he said, your enemy is not a dead body. The people who are fighting in a conflict think they can win. So it's it's always interesting to see who actually goes and picks a fight with bigger countries, and in some cases, comes out on top. But the game that you're working on. But what I wanted to do was actually kind of bring it back to Brett and get a little more kind of pie in the sky here, because I remember back in the day studying nuclear strategy, and in effect, the whole game of nuclear war is not to shoot. So to what degree can you have something like Twilight Struggle that has, officially there's not supposed to be any shooting in it? Right. Can that be categorized as a conflict game? Could asymmetric warfare, terrorism, all this kind of stuff? What can be classified as a conflict game, and what kind of feelings are trying to be evoked by those games?
The GMT has a fairly recent game about COINTEL kind of thing, or coin counterinsurgency. I forget there's a coin system. I forget exactly what the game is called, but I guess that one does have actual fighting, I believe, but it's more about kind of managing.
I'll jump.
Yeah, jump in there.
Right. Well, kind of along the same lines, but I have another Twitter viewer question, and you're already kind of talking about something that sounds a little more innovative, a little more different. So I was wondering if you guys could think about this question. Jesse Wright asked the question: what is the most innovative mechanic that you've seen in war games? For people that are unfamiliar with war games, maybe they're missing out as a designer on some different mechanics that are being used. What is an innovative mechanic that you see in war games, or maybe there's a unique example? Brett, why don't you go first?
An innovative mechanic in war games. Well, I don't want to go straight to Jeff's game, but I think the dice in 1812 and 1775 and that system, I think that's a really innovative system.
I would agree.
Where each type of unit has its own dice and has its own number of dice that is possible to roll. It kind of takes a whole combat results table and just throws it into the dice, and there's no lookup on a CRT. There's no consulting charts or anything like that. You just say, I've got 3 cubes, I roll 3 dice, boom, you've got results. And I think that's a huge innovation. And I'm surprised I haven't seen more of that in other games.
Yeah, one innovation I really like is the Fog of War, emulating Fog of War with blocks. Having that hidden data. You can see it, but that your opponents can't, and you don't know how much damage. They can see you're damaged. The Fog and War in 1812 and 1775 is sort of by the turn order. You're never quite sure what's going to happen. Yeah, there's a block game right there, 17 to 59. And there's the 1812 one of that as well. But the Fog of War is something that I really like in war games, because it's not all open knowledge. You sort of that hidden things, and there's a number of different mechanisms you can use to emulate that.
It's a great example. Sen, I know you have a question about dice.
Well, I just wanted to talk about dice because these guys are the guys that co-designed a game that has 97 custom dice in it. So I wanted to ask you guys how co-designing the Lord of the Rings game was working between the two of you. You guys are not in the same country, all that stuff. Tell us about the design process.
We used the internet cameras, and we used the dice and stickers. And I think we set up a multi-camera setup a couple times where we had each other, then we had a camera looking down at the play field, and yeah, it was hard because you know how hard it is with custom dice. A lot of things had to be reused in the middle of the game and stuff like that, and play tests. But I still have all the dice that we have, and I just don't want to peel them back yet. It's like, oh. Yeah, dice are they're fun, but they're really hard to you know, with 97 that many dice.
Yeah. Well, and we had the benefit of building upon you know, Eric's system, Eric and Mike's system. And it's already a pretty robust system, and we kind of layered on that kind of storyline from the movies, and adapted that basic system to, you know, maybe a little bit more storytelling kind of or a more cinematic feel to the game. But you know, we of course we created all new units and dice and stuff for the game. But yeah, we benefited a lot from them from building upon that pretty robust system already in place.
You get, you know, talking about all those dice. There's something about dice, right? There's just something about dice, like that butterfly feeling you get in your stomach before you drop that roll to hit. You're just trying to roll the hard 6, you know, whatever. How much does that play into? How much is that experience a core experience in wargame design, or are there others that are equally kind of represented in wargame design? Jeph, what do you think about that?
I think it's really important. For an example, our publisher, when we were making 1812, he actually wanted to put a symbol on the blank side for the command decision, and I was so against it because I mean, there's only so much that the human brain can look at once. If you're rolling 6 dice or 7 dice, and you want to see the results, 3 symbols is too much. You got to look around too much. But if you suddenly see hits and misses, and then the blanks really don't matter for this part, you can get the whole table going, all right, or you know, at the same time, and you hear these great groans and tears. So it's like, it's very, very powerful what they do, and that's why some of the best, or those battle games like BattleTech or whatever, where you roll hundreds of little tiny D6s, and all you're looking for is you're just looking for the number itself. Yeah. My gun can shoot this many, but you're just looking for one symbol.
Right.
Even better if it was just a single symbol dice or whatever, so you can actually see those results. But it's very important, and really that's what I like about dice, is because you can get those groans, you get those immediate. It's even better. It's something similar like playing a card. If you play a card and everybody sees it, but that's much more information than what we put on the dice. A die is just like one item, and
that's a really interesting point about the blank side of the dice. I wouldn't have put my finger on it, but I totally had that experience of just that clarity of the excitement of seeing something. And but changing gears slightly, another variable when it comes to game design, and I think sometimes war games get a bad rap for this, is time. Often people think of war games as these really massive, long experiences, and so some people are scared off by that. Some people love that and are looking for that experience. Brett, why don't we go to you first? You know,
Sure.
what are some of the strengths and weaknesses when it comes to a longer game, and why do you think we keep seeing long war games?
Well, I think those kind of games, I have played very few of the big, heavy, long war games, partly because of opportunity. I don't know a lot of heavy war gamers in the area, A lot. Well, I had a war game buddy for a while. He passed away a few years ago, but he was of an older generation. I think a lot of those games appeal more to an older generation. You see those kind of games played at cons, and it tends to be, guys who are, Korea vets, Vietnam vets, a lot of the older war gamers, and I think that allows, people, those kind of heavy simulation games allow you to kind of relive a lot of, memories and just this kind of experience those battles and those situations from a very present perspective. The more detail you can put into some of those games, the deeper your kind of immersion into them, and I think that appeals to a certain type of person or a certain type of player. When you're in those kind of games, I don't think the time matters too much. It's like a role-playing game. I grew up playing role-playing games, and it's not uncommon. I don't play much very much anymore, but when I was heavy into role-playing games, we would play for 6 or 8 hours at a stretch, and that was nothing. I think those kind of those heavy war games with a 50-page rulebook is the only thing that comes close to it's like a role-playing game with a 300-page rulebook.
Yeah, interesting observation. I forgot to mention that question was from Ed Bryan online. And specifically, I want to jump back to Jeph as well about that. What do you prefer, a massive multi-day game or a longer game, or do you prefer like a quicker game experience?
It depends. I mean, it's all. I love the quick games, but I think it's all an investment of rules reading versus length of game. If I'm just reading 50 minutes of rules, it should be about an hour game. But if I've got to spend a day and a half trying to figure out rules, like I want it to be a full weekend of adventure. It's also that a lot of these war games that sort of feed off each other, so knowing the rules of one helps you know the rules of another. So all the attacks in one corner, defense, movement, all that information's already there. So it's a little bit easier for people who played back in the Avalon Hill games in the 70s to keep playing and keep wanting to play new versions of those systems. But nothing beats or at least the memory. I think sometimes our memory is a big factor here. Nothing beats the memory of playing a weekend, a full weekend, 48 hours of gaming with your best friends over a table. I don't know if I could ever afford the time to do it now, but I know I see people at WBC and they're playing 5 days or longer on one game on a giant table, so it's still there.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Sun Tzu, to a lot of English speakers, has a good quip on this one. We've heard of blundering swiftness in war, but we've never heard of a clever operation that was prolonged. But having been a guy who would start playing Starfleet battles at 9 o'clock at night and be on the end of the second turn at 6 o'clock in the morning, I'm right there with you. And Gorn for the win, by the way. Gorn Tractor. Yeah, that's where it's at. But I know Sen has a question.
I grew up actually playing block games. So I don't know how many people out there have seen them. They're I don't even know if they're really a Canadian thing, but we played them.
I do not know these block games.
We played them in school, and they have like the big thick blocks, and you rotate the sides to show how many hits you've taken as a unit, and that's what I grew up playing. So, what was your first war game, Jeph? What was your first war game?
First war game is probably Stratego or Risk, probably. I mean, I loved Risk. I always loved it a lot. So, but as Stratego, I always have good memories of that as well. Haven't played it recently, but.
And Brett, what about you?
You know, I didn't learn Risk until a few years ago, and Stratego I played for the first time last year. Stratego is a brilliant game, by the way.
It is.
But the first, like, what I would consider a war game that I played was Axis and Allies, and we used to play a lot of Axis and Allies.
Cool, cool. When you guys have been working on, I know, Brett, you talked to me before we started the show that you're doing like a Euro war crossover type thing, more of a conflict. Can you tell us what the difference in your mind is between a conflict game and a war game?
Well, so specifically the one I'll talk about is it's got a Russian name. It's called the Voyevlastia, and it's set during the Russian Revolution, and it is it's kind of abstracted. It is asymmetric sides. It's the Revolution of 1917. It is set during the period between the February Revolution and the October Revolution, and so Tsar Nicholas II abdicates at the end of February, and the provisional government takes over. So one player plays the provisional government and their military forces and other things, and the other player is the Petrograd Soviet, who has kind of they're starting this kind of workers' revolution, and they have the backing of the people, basically, and so they enter this period during that time of what they call the Voyevlastia, or dual power, where both the provisional government and the Petrograd Soviet had semi-official government power. So they had like this dual government happening. And so in the game, there's different areas of conflict in Russia, and each player has a set of units, and they're just really basically abstract units, just basically numbers, and they can kind of represent a little bit of everything. So, the Petrograd Soviet's players' units may represent mob actions, they may represent speeches, they may represent worker strikes, things like that, railroad strikes. The provisional government's players' pieces may represent, military action. They may represent, government crackdowns on workers' rights. But so they're very abstract. But you're still placing kind of numbered blocks in areas, and there's still at the end of a round you compare the values. So it's kind of an area control game, but it has some mechanisms for kind of attrition. So after an area is resolved, there's some attrition, and units may reduce in power or change powers. So it's very much has a feel of a conflict game. It's an area control kind of game, a majority kind of game, but it does have this feeling of conflict because there's the attrition that happens after an area is resolved, which but like I said, it's all very, very abstracted out. It's kind of left to the players to imagine what exactly is happening. You're not sending this White Legion in here to capture the whatever Petrograd Soviet House of Parliament. You're not actually doing a specific thing with specific historical units, but you're struggling for control in this limited environment. Does that? I should stop banging that thing.
But that sounds awesome. I'm like, where do I buy this game?
I want to play it. I want to play it.
On that note, Jeph, what games are you working on? Any spoilers you can let us know what you're working on?
We're finishing up the third in the series of the Birth of America, the war game, and it's going to be the French-Indian War. And so the game design is pretty much done. We're just to the publisher stage, get artwork and things like that. And then I'm sort of working on potentially modifying the system for sort of a Civil War type of thing right now.
Ooh.
So
Sounds awesome.
it's going to be quite a bit different system, but it's going to use some of the core mechanisms from that.
Excellent.
Cool. And just want to turn it over to Brett here. Something that we try to ask people on here. It's designers discussing designs. What kind of tips would you have for a new designer starting out designing games?
Play a lot of games. You want specific tips, or
stuff that you've learned.
Go to Protospiel, make friends. One of the most valuable things that I've taken part in is Protospiel. I've been going to Protospiel for 10 years now. I've met some of my best friends there. I think something that's very valuable if you can't go to a Protospiel is to, if you just make friends with other designers and just get together for a weekend, or have a 3-day thing. Have some people over to your house. Go to somebody else's house if they've got space, and just get together. Get a few guys together and just play test the crap out of stuff, and live together, and workshop each other's games heavily. I think that's the most important thing that I've done in the last 10 years is just make a group of friends, and we just we know each other, we know each other's tastes and stuff, and we get together a couple times a year, and it's friendship, it's bonding, but it's also like really heavy duty game design and development. That's very useful.
What a great piece of advice. Thanks so much, Brett. That's awesome. And Jeph, from you, what's one piece of advice that you would give to a novice designer?
Yeah, it's really along the lines of Brett's there, but it's just talk about game design, talk about games, find someone not even have to be comfortable with, just people who are interested in it. Just talk about it as much as you can. Discuss the rules, discuss what games mean to you and stuff like this. Did I just lose it there? Sorry.
No, you're good. You're good.
So, and also, if you need to get things going, have a bed model to get you excited. Like, sometimes the best times we're driving home from some of these events, and red ball, and you're talking with your friend. You're just like, holy crap, we just designed like games. This is awesome.
Yeah. If you've got to drive to one of these events, don't drive alone.
Yeah,
drive with two or three guys. Yeah. You've got a 6 or 8 hour car trip and you're going to be designing games all the way home. I've designed half a dozen games on the way home from these things.
Absolutely, I can agree with that. So I just want to formally thank both Jeph and Brett for coming on the show. We really appreciate you sharing some of your experiences. We'll hopefully have you on the show again, because I cannot believe an hour just flew by. I feel like we just scratch the surface. But I just want to say thanks to our viewers. We're going to have an after show, and we're still learning how this goes and stuff like that. So we will be posting a link if anyone wants to watch the live after show. Otherwise, we'll be posting it on Friday. I don't know, but Jeph and Brett are welcome to pop in if they'd like, or you can just listen to Dylan, Sen, and I talk about all the things that are bursting out of our heads from this conversation. Also, I want to give a plug for next week's episode. We have a couple great guests on. We have Josh Capel and Stephen Sauer coming on to discuss art and design, both designers but also artists. And then we also have Jordan Goodard, who will be coming on. He is the designer of Collapse, which is going on Kickstarter real soon, and he just hosted a really interesting design contest where he sent out a little design kit to 10 different designers, and he's going to announce the winner on the show next week. So check that out. We'll send all the links and all that. And also, we really want to recommend people check out the Nerd Nighters. We always follow our show up after the Nerd Nighters. Please check them out, and then when you're done watching them, come watch the Late Show with us, where we'll talk about designing games. So thanks again, and have a great night.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
And we're out.
All right.
Or not.
I suppose I can mute.